Remix, which is a transportation planning, a kind of a hybrid between tech and transportation planning for 500 plus cities. So really embodying the merger of technology, expertise, and impact right there. But she also, deeper, if you go further into her bio, she was with Code for America for a while. She was at Zipcar, where she launched the user experience portfolio, I guess, or department. And she, previous to that, has a background in architecture and urban planning. So in some ways, right, I can't imagine a better person to be chief of staff for the city of Boston, right? Someone who has this deep topical understanding of cities, this passion for cities and communities, and serving them in the ways that they need to be served, but also knows how to run a company, right? Knows how to run a lot of people doing a lot of things, and has thought a lot about how institutions have to collaborate with each other to make that happen. So this is exactly the kind of leadership that I think will make the Wu administration a success, and I think for us as the research policy community of Greater Boston, a fantastic administration to partner with. Many of you actually probably work for the administration, so for us to all work together and really have impact in the coming years. So with that, thank you so much, Tiffany, for joining us this morning. I can't wait to hear your thoughts.
Hey, good morning, everyone. It's great to see you. Thank you so much, Dan. Thank you so much, Uta and David, for having me here. And thank you for hosting this conference and for your leadership at BARI. So I'll just start by saying I'm the next in line of many Asian women, Helen Moon, Beth Wong, and countless others who've been either mistaken for or asked to stand in for Mayor Michelle Wu. And I think what's interesting about me standing here is that if I were in her place, I would actually have been very hesitant to hire myself as chief of staff as another Asian person, because I would have felt, I would have needed to appoint someone completely different with a completely different background to speak to a different constituency. And in many ways, I was so shocked and so honored to be in this place that I am today. And I think what I asked her after the interview, why did you pick me out of the thousands of people who have political experience or worked on your campaign or what have you? She said it was because of your love for cities, Tiffany. And that was literally the top criteria she had for this role. So let me share a little bit about me. So I'll speak a little bit about who I am, where I come from, what I believe in, what I care about, and then I'll segue and talk about what the Wu administration is deeply passionate about and what we're working on from a policy perspective. So I've been back in Boston for a few months now, and in some ways it is the same city that I came to for school, and it's also very, very different. What I noticed when I arrived here from New Jersey in a minivan with my parents and all of my belongings in the minivan, I noticed immediately the vibrant neighborhoods, the diversity of the student body and the campus, and also a city rich in history, but not necessarily stuck in the past. And now that I'm back over a decade later, I've noticed that it's also a city grappling with the challenges that many other cities that I've lived in and communities around the world that we're facing. So in addition to the pandemic, systemic racism, climate change, and displacement, I think one of the many things about Boston is that we're uniquely equipped to tackle these challenges with the robustness of the research and policy community here. And those are actually what brought me here in the first place. So I studied, as Dan mentioned, architecture and urban planning in school, and that subject area really called to me because I wanted to understand how the built environment of a city affects people. And I believed then, as a student, and even more now, that simply studying our cities and the act of studying our cities can be a powerful approach to advance equity and access. Navigating Boston as someone who grew up in an immigrant family on a cul-de-sac was quite an adventure, and I would get lost pretty often, and I found out later that I was getting lost on purpose. Every time I got lost, I discovered a new corner of the city, and every time the red line squealed over the Longfellow Bridge, I got a glimpse of one of the first places that made me feel at home. And eventually I even braved learning how to ride a bike in a city for the first time, despite almost getting doored on Mass Ave more times than I can count. I still think biking in a city is a rite of passage for any able-bodied person who wants to feel the true tempo of a city. And one of the things that I like to think about and dream about from my new office, which for the first time I have an office with a door on it, I think about all the ways that we can prioritize our people over our vehicles when we cultivate communities over commutes. And one of the things that reminds me when I now have to think about what a chief of staff role is a quote that I first learned about urban research during my time at MIT. And it is attributed to the historian Studs Terkel, and he says, "If there is knowledge, it lies in the fusion of the book and the street." If the book represents our academic life, then the street represents the people and the places that we all spend time in. And that's what I wanted most to impact. So let me take a step back and talk about one of my favorite research experiences when I was a student, which was in the urban planning department at MIT. I had the privilege of exploring that very idea, the relationship between places and people, by going to Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam with my professor, Dr. Annette Kim. And the goal was to map the most mundane and important public space in Ho Chi Minh City, which is the sidewalk. And the sidewalk hosted informal street vendors selling Banseo crepes, Chayao crispy rolls, everything that you can imagine. And they were true entrepreneurs and caught in this informal liminal space. This space, we discovered, exists in being between truly integral to the social urban fabric and simultaneously not being officially recognized as a part of it. And our research team mapped and interviewed hundreds of these street vendors and made little data points on actually like a handheld GIS thing. This was like, I don't know, before smartphones really were happening. And the government at the time was really trying to push out street vendors in an attempt to present a more sanitized experience to tourists, a la Singapore. And so we brought our research, our analyses, and our data to our partners at the Ho Chi Minh City Planning Department, and we shared our findings. And what we found was that through this ethnographic cartography, we were able to argue that these street vendors, while yes, informal, were actually a fundamental part of street life and of the economy. And while this threat of so-called sidewalk reclamation comes around again and again with every new government and administration in Vietnam, we did persuade city officials to think differently about the community that they were threatening and even working to displace. And we had even proposed a painted line along the sidewalk through many neighborhoods that tourists could follow along, like the Freedom Trail. And this research really evolved my understanding of people, of space, of governance, and how they all interact. Which brings me to Remix. So I had a chance to bring this perspective to my year-long fellowship with Code for America, and I know that many of you, including Nigel, who I see sitting there in the room, actually brought Code for America to Boston for its first inaugural year. And it is an organization working between the public and the private sectors to bring technology, design, to improve government services. And that's actually where I met my co-founders, Dan, Danny, and Sam, and these are three friends with whom we were working on a hackathon project, actually, to suggest better transit routes to the city of San Francisco as residents. And this is a hackathon project that was put on by the nonprofit, and we were just really excited to build a grassroots app, basically. And it was a very simple drag and drop interface where you can drag and drop a route on a map, see how much the route might cost, who might ride it, whether it's a good investment, bring in demographic data to see who you could serve. And this grassroots project began literally like that at a table in the office, and Code for America tweeted our prototype out into the world. And a few hours later, our app crashed. And what we had realized, without really realizing it, is that it had gone viral on Twitter, and all of these urban planning blogs had picked it up. And before we knew it, at the end of the day, we had 200 emails from planners in cities around the world who had saw what we built, said, I loved it, and asked us to build 200 other features on top of it so they could use it for their real life transportation planning project in their city. So that was a magical moment for us. We didn't really know what we had hit on, but we knew it was special. And I'm sure a few technologists here understand the feeling of both horror and joy when you learn that your thing that is useful to someone has crashed. So my co-founders and I, we were designers, we were software engineers, but we weren't business people. So we applied to a startup accelerator in San Francisco called Y Combinator, and that gave us the kick in the pants to figure out a sustainable business model and got us on the right track to starting and building a really strong team. So fast forward 7 years, we grew to a team of 70, opened offices in New York and Amsterdam, and brought on hundreds of agencies onto our platform, including the MBTA. They're doing their full Better Bus project in Remix right now, Cambridge, Somerville, Rhode Island, and suddenly it wasn't just a prototype anymore, and it became an incredibly unexpected idea that helped planners visualize what was possible. And through that experience, that's why I was invited to serve on the commission for San Francisco's Department of the Environment. And it was really to help connect the dots between transportation, which accounts for nearly 50% of greenhouse gas emissions in the city of San Francisco, and also planning, data, and technology, and bring that to the agency. And Remix was one of the few startups where all these worlds collided. And by the time we were acquired by VIA last year, we were working with over 500 cities. And all of those cities, each time they provided feedback to us on what we could make better, we would build it into our platform and launch it to everyone as a software as a service approach, which meant every other city also benefited from the feedback of every other city. So serving on the Environment Commission really gave me my first real taste of what it would be like to sit on the other side of the table, and I loved it. So now I'm back here. I moved from the Bay Area to the Bay State and serving the people of Boston as Michelle's chief of staff, and occasionally standing in for her as well. So I'll pause and talk a little bit about what it is that we're working on inside City Hall in the hopes that it sparks some nuggets of inspiration for you all as you go about your research and collaboration. So Michelle talks about 3 principles that really guide the work that we do. The first one is do the big things by getting the small things right. And this comes from a very strong belief that residents rightfully expect that the basics of local government around picking up trash, plowing streets, issuing birth certificates need to be done well. And each time we get these basic things right, it means we build trust. And every moment we should think about as a trust building opportunity between local government and the city. In order to make the larger, more transformative things that take people a second to think about and swallow, whether it's affordable housing near their house or it's a big investment in public schools, those are the things that we need to focus on. We have to do the little things in order to have the opportunity and the luxury of doing the big things. Number 2, Michelle really likes to talk about getting City Hall out of City Hall into our neighborhoods. And what that means is doing the big and the basic requires us to learn from our residents where they are. And one very, very small detail is we're actually hosting all of our cabinet meetings instead of in City Hall next to the mayor's office. We're actually going out into the community, going into various community centers and affordable housing developments and hosting our cabinet meetings there. So every single person in leadership at the city has that firsthand experience as well. And then thirdly, probably comes as no surprise, is expanding the possible. Local government, I know for a fact that we are notorious for saying no. Over the last 2 months that I've been in this job, the number of times I've heard, we can't do that because we don't do it that way, it has been astounding. And Michelle actually has a sign on her wall that says yes, behind her head on Zoom, so that whenever she's on a call, it just says yes above her head. It's pretty amazing. And I think what we're really excited about is just making that word impossible into possible wherever we can. So Dan asked me to share a little bit about the specific projects and policy items that we're working on. And so here are here are 7 of the many specific policy goals that we're prioritizing. So number one is closing the racial wealth gap. And this is really to make opportunities for building generational wealth more accessible. So things such as our sheltered market pilot, which ensures that businesses owned by folks of color and women have access to city contracts, and through things like tuition-free community college, which the mayor actually just announced this week, and received an incredible infusion of federal funding that Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley secured. Number two, grow affordable housing. This includes things like we launched a rent stabilization committee. We're working with the state to pass transfer fee legislation and updating things like our inclusionary development program and linkage fees. Number three, maybe my favorite, but I'm not supposed to pick favorites, elevate planning and transforming transit. So as a first step, we've actually already partnered with the T to make the 23, 28, and 29 bus routes fare-free for 2 years. And we recently hired our first ever chief of planning, Arthur Jameson, which I know many of you in this room know. He's coming back from stints in Detroit and at Hood at the federal level, coming back to Boston to help transform our approach with planning and ensure that we're a city for everyone. Number four, nurture and empower our youngest residents. We just launched an Office of Early Childhood, so all kids under 5 have access to universal high-quality care and education. That is going to be a long project and journey that we'll be working on together. And we are really investing in Boston Public Schools facilities and infrastructure in the biggest budget that BPS has ever had in the history of BPS. Number 5, we are taking a public health approach to improving public safety. We're trying to deeply understand the complex motivators of crime and working to address root causes. And right now we are launching a search to ensure that our next police commissioner is committed to our community's values as well. Number 6, revitalize our downtown and Main Street corridors. So the mayor is really passionate about arts and placemaking, and we want to invest in those areas to ensure that our commercial districts are really places that elevate the beauty and the magic of public space and elevate them for all residents, all ages and abilities. And finally, number 7, we are making an all-of-government effort to implement a Green New Deal for Boston. So this is not only focused on creating a carbon-free, climate-ready plan, but doing so in a way that makes our city more just and equitable. So we recently launched our heat resilience study, and we budgeted for a tree canopy plan to mitigate the dangers of intense heat. As many of you know, our most critical environmental justice communities, Chinatown, Dorchester, Mattapan, Roxbury, are all hotspots for extreme heat and are predominantly neighborhoods of color. And in addition to that, we're working to electrify city vehicles, including school buses, some of which we expect to bring online soon in the next couple years. As the mayor says about Green New Deal, literally everything is tied to the Green New Deal. So I'm sure you've noticed that with each of these goals, the city is not doing it alone. We're working with the state and federal partners, local businesses and entrepreneurs, universities, nonprofits, and as one of my colleagues at City Hall likes to say, Chris Carter, I don't know if he's in the room, he leads the Office of New Urban Mechanics and likes to put a little spin on one of our values, which is we also need to get the classroom out of the classroom. And it's true, the best ideas come from the fusion of the book and the street, after all, and we simply cannot create great cities alone. So that's why the mayor, myself, and all of us at the city, many of whom you will see and meet today, they are so excited about this conference, so excited about BARI's work, and whether it's City Hall or the classroom, we have to work together to best serve our residents. And that's the path that Mayor Wu has walked throughout her career, that's the path that I followed and have been really inspired by, and that is the path that I know you all believe, and that's why you're sitting in these seats today. So, my offer for you is, number 1, please take today as an opportunity to make new connections across disciplines, sectors, and then number 2, really help us identify what is the cutting edge research in order to push our 7 and many more policy goals forward. We have no shortage of big ideas or big thinkers, but we do need support in refining these ideas, prioritizing them, implementing them, running experiments on them to really measure and learn from them and see if they work. Just last weekend, we celebrated the 200th anniversary of Boston being incorporated as a city. And Mayor Wu and the City Council, they vowed that celebrating our revolutionary moments would be inclusive of the true wealth and diversity of Boston's history. And it is that history on which we are committed to building our future. In her remarks, Michelle said, our presence, our mere presence, continues to be revolutionary. And with your help, with your collaboration, we can make sure that every urban research agenda, every innovation truly is revolutionary. Thank you.